everything that you're doing today is influenced and through the perspective and through the lens of your past and your past experiences. That's how you're seeing the world. So unless you shift your perspective of the past and those experiences, you're projecting and you're bringing all that pain and all that stuff to your relationships, whether it's your children, your spouse, your relationship with money, your capacity to fulfill your own potential. It affects everything.
I'd like to welcome to the Journeying Soul, Victoria Volk. How are you doing today, Victoria?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the
Oh,
opportunity.
thank you for coming on the show. So, I often like to start my interviews with the personal story. So, in your case, you're a grief author. I don't even know if that's particularly a genre, but I'm going to say people write books about grief or grief authors, and you do grief coaching. So, how did your dad died when you were 8, and I'm assuming that's kind of the launch pad for your story. Can you just share a little bit about that time? Because also, I just want to add before you even speak. I mean, the thing about having a loss that early in life is you don't have the vocabulary to express yourself or the vocabulary to understand what's going on. So I know that that had to be an issue. But please tell me a little bit about that and how that formed you.
Well, and so from the age of 6, really, my life really just I was kind of put on in the back seat just because my mom had so many other things she was dealing with, but they were gone a lot. He and my mom were gone a lot because he was a veteran, so his care was 3 hours away at the veterans hospital. And
Oh,
so but the thing is my grandmother, my mother's mother, had been diagnosed with melanoma. By the time my father had died, my mother was emotionally spent, of course. So emotionally, she was unavailable. I was kind of shuttled around between the neighbor and the friends of the family. Um, but yeah, so after he passed, within a couple of years, my mom had remarried, but then I had been molested and my sister moved away because she graduated. She joined the military. And so she was like a second mom to me. So there was just a lot of between the age of 6 and 12, just chaos and just I was just existing. And, you talked about the not having the language. There was no talking really about, well, how are you feeling? Everyone just assumed. I remember someone saying at the funeral, you're this tall and everyone's around you walking around. And I heard someone say, she doesn't understand what's going on anyway.
ah.
Yeah.
But
And
meanwhile, she's sucking it all up like a sponge. So, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, of
And
course.
my kids, I have 3 kids. So when my kids were 8, I looked at them and I thought, would they understand if their dad passed away? Absolutely. Like we do not give kids enough credit for what their understanding or what their
Mhm.
capacity to understand is. Um, and people always say, "Oh, kids are resilient; they'll bounce back or whatever." And kids, it's like, okay, well, yeah, they appear to be resilient, but this is going to come up later in their life. And so once my mother had remarried, that marriage was not a healthy one. A lot of arguing. He was a truck driver, long haul trucker, so he was gone a lot anyway. But I could not wait to graduate and get out of the house, put it that way. And sure enough, all of that grief and everything would show up and rear its ugly head in my early 20s. And everything was just snowballing, and I didn't have the coping skills. I didn't have the relationship with my mother who she was someone I could go to to talk to. I tried therapy, but yeah, discovering alcohol, starting to go to the bars, things like that. I knew every drink special every night of the week. Somehow I didn't get fired from my job, which I probably should have been. I was on the brink of losing my license due to speeding tickets and had several fender benders. Um, just a lot of loss throughout my life. I just really, by the time I got to my 30s and had my last child, and I just felt like my life was just one of suffering. I struggled with postpartum depression after my youngest. That was how I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell a soul until I went through grief recovery. It was, I could give you so many examples of loss and loss of safety and security throughout my life that had nothing to do with death. And that's
Yeah.
the thing, like, so many people that are afraid to look at the past or look at the things that have happened to them and their experiences, they're afraid to look at the
Mhm.
past and they just say, "I'm fine." And we say that in grief recovery that fine is feelings inside not expressed.
Mhm.
Because if you were like me, no one gave you the space and the time or the acknowledgement that what you were going through was hard or difficult and that it will be okay as long as you have somebody, the support system around you, as long as you have the tools. No one came to me and said, "Here are the tools that you need to get through this. I'm here for you." Like, not, I had to do that for myself. And I think
Yeah.
when we get to adulthood, that is the choice that we have, each and every one of us, to sweep our own doorstep, to find the thing that's going to help us get out of that mentality that your life is one of suffering. That's all it's going to be. That's what I believed. That's a story I attached to.
Mm.
And it wasn't until grief recovery that I thought something else was possible.
You have
And
said so many things that I want to um, hopefully get you to expand on. Um, I mean, obviously, it's important for people listening to know that when you're speaking about grief, writing about grief, helping people with grief, you've walked the path. Um, but the other thing you mentioned too, and this came up in another podcast I did a month or so ago, that there are other losses besides like the physical death of a person that can have these gigantic impacts. And something that in your book touched me personally, like it set off a thing for me when and I'll share a little of my story. One of the events in my life when I was still in grade school, I was 11, my sister had tried to kill herself. And there were other things that happened in that time. But one of the things that happened in that time was for all of my childhood in the summer, we had gone to this pool and tennis club. It sounds a little frou-frou shishi, but it wasn't. It was just in the 60s when they would build a suburban neighborhood, they would often add like a big pool and a couple of courts. And the housewives, because back then in the late 60s, early 70s, there might be just one car. So you would walk to this place. And so that was how I spent my summer every summer. It was a cheapy little club that was built for the neighborhood. When I was 11, that pool club closed. And it was such a point of grief for me, in addition to what was happening with my sister and to my family. And the thing that you wrote in your book that struck me in a way so similar is that your family, when your dad died, your family stopped going to church. And that was to me, that was your pool club. That was this
mm,
thing that you needed that was like a good space for you. And, definitely when you're young, you don't know what secondary losses are, but that was one of those things where it's like it's not just your dad, like your whole world, and you lost church, which was so important to you.
and his whole family, because his whole
Yeah,
family was no longer in my life
yeah.
either.
You said there was, and if I'm misspeaking, correct me. You also had like dinners after church, like on that weekend, right? There was like a family thing
That was on my mother's side.
on
So
your mother's side,
before,
but that.
yeah, before my mother's mother had passed away, after Sunday church, we would go to my grandmother's for lunch.
Mhm.
And but on my father's side, after he passed, there was uncles, aunts, cousins. I had no relationship with any of them. The story that I was told was that my uncle said that he would watch over us and take care of us. Well, he didn't keep to his promise. And so that was my mom severed that thread. And I never got a birthday card from my grandmother, never heard from her. And
Wow.
so what it was, it the adults who just couldn't be adult? Be
Usually,
adults. Yeah.
usually
It's like, this is the
failure of
thing.
adulthood.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like those listening to this, think about the stories that you as the parent or the adult has attached to and the ripple effect that that has for generations to come.
Mhm.
Because every choice that we make as parents has an effect on our children.
Mhm. And also you as you said, down the generations. Like I think of some
Generations to
things
come.
I've dealt with just in the last 10 years and how my grandparents' choices created this situation now. And then obviously their parents too, and the times. It's just, it's generational trauma
Mhm.
is basically where we're going. But we know what generational trauma is and that it has a name. So adults today have a choice to do something different. And you talk about this a lot in your book. I think when you're talking about there's some sections on victimhood and the choices a person can make about that.
Like, if we look in the mirror, like, we are the common denominator in all of our problems. We really are. We really are. And so, what is the ownership I need to take? Well, what can I do to impact my own life? What can I do to change the stories that have been told to me? How can I flip that script? How can I better understand myself so that I can make different choices and shift my behaviors and perspectives to move forward, to get beyond this? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's kind of where I got to the point of being. And so I was picking up all the books, I was going through the personal development programs, reading all the things, taking every personality test that's known to man. I know my Enneagram, I know my Myers-Briggs, I know all the stuff. I did all the things
Yeah.
because I thought,
Uh-huh.
"Oh my god, I just need to figure myself out so I can
Yeah.
figure my shit out."
Hmm.
And the answer didn't come to me until, like, I had another loss. Actually, my uncle, who I wrote about in the book that I went to go see when he was diagnosed, the one that I was referring to earlier, he was diagnosed with brain cancer, and I went to go see him. That changed my life. It changed, it's like I flipped that script. I flipped the story that was told to me. I didn't want to attach to that story anymore. I wanted to feel differently moving forward about all of that that didn't involve me, right? That was all about other people's choices. And I felt closer to my dad than I ever had since the day he had died, reconnecting with my uncle because they were so close. That's why I'm so passionate about people understanding grief and understanding that everything that you're doing today is influenced and through the perspective and through the lens of your past and your past experiences. That's how you're seeing the world. So unless you shift your perspective of the past and those experiences, you're projecting and you're bringing all that pain and all that stuff to your relationships, whether it's your children, your spouse, your relationship with money, your capacity to fulfill your own potential. It affects everything.
So, yes, you mentioned in your book that Tony Robbins was important to you in terms of financial, I don't want to say financial healing, but just in dealing with that part of it.
Yeah, I don't follow Tony Robbins anymore, but
Okay.
in the
I was
beginning.
wondering about that because there's certain guys out there. We'll digress for a second, but there's certain guys out there like I say, like Tony Robbins, and even for some people, like Joel Osteen comes on after it used to be on after Meet the Press, so our TV would always roll into it. There's
Mhm.
certain guys where it's like there's something to say there, but it's not going to take you, I feel, through the depth of really transforming your life. It's like a certain message that I feel it's almost like,
Yes.
I don't want to say shock therapy, but it's like just a very different energy
Mhm.
that quickly can reframe things for you, but you have to look much deeper. So I completely get
Yeah.
that. But how would
Well,
you
and
describe?
when you come from a home of lack, where there's a lack mindset, mentality, that lack, just there's just never enough. The money stories, like we have relational stories that we're born into. We've got money stories that we're born into, and there was never more than enough. That was never the
Mhm.
mindset. Like what we have is more than enough. It was we're just barely scraping by. And that's the mindset that I had going into my young adulthood. Like, I always just had just enough.
Mhm.
And through grief recovery too, we can apply those tools to money. I've come to learn that money is energy. It's just energy, and it's the level of importance that we place on it. And what it means to me to have money is what it enables me to do. It's a completely different shift from how I grew up. But now it's really I'm getting away from looking at these gurus or these teachers, and I'm more of coming into my own of what is it in me that I already know to be true for myself, like what trusting myself and trusting that I have the tools and the knowledge now. I have everything I need within me. How can I apply that? And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. I don't read near as many. I have the self-help books, but I'm not as I'm no longer trying to fix myself, put it that way.
Yeah. You also mentioned that, Byron Katie, um, was important to you. I don't know if that was just during the period or if you still she's got her is it 5 questions? Her big book
Yeah.
is The Work, right? Is that's the
Yeah.
name of it, right? I know I read it like 15, 20. It's kind of old, but it's 5 questions, right?
It's so crazy you mentioned that because I was just going through my desk and cleaning my drawers just
Yeah.
this in the last week, and I came across this worksheet that she has, probably still on her website, and I was like, yeah, it's just helped to it's a reframing. It's just
Yeah.
an exercise in reframing. But yeah, that's on her website too. I'm pretty sure still.
Yeah, and it's funny because I had an interview with a, psychic medium, again, probably a month or so ago, Corby Mitleid, and she has questions that she says they're sort of similar to The Work. Like, her thing is like, "What are you X about?" Like, "What are you upset about, fearful about, whatever? Why are you this way about X? And what would happen if it didn't like X went away? Like if you didn't have X, if X fell apart." And it's almost like the Byron Katie stuff, like, what do you know is true? How do you know it's true? And I can't remember what the other questions are, but I
Mhm.
do think it's a really good, important paradigm shift when you can say to yourself, like, this thing, whatever the thing is that's bothering you, or you're fearful about, or you're angsting about, like, well, how do you know that this is true? What you're thinking is, and why is it true that it's important? And yeah, it can definitely reframe things. And I also think in terms of grief, one of the leaps that you made that other people make too is when you realize, and I connect this with the pages, you wrote about victimhood, when you realize like some of these things happen and it's not personal. You can't take it personally. It's just what somebody did with what they had maybe, or I mean, I had, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, at my sister's funeral, there was a whole thing where one of my aunts that we were estranged from threatened me in the church. And I realized other relatives had enabled her to be there. We had been estranged from her. And that took a toll on my health, like the years, just what the family had done. And I realized only a few years ago, like really what I should have done when she threatened me was just laugh at how stupid it was. I mean, it's like some people do terrible things in order to try to make you love them. And I just didn't have the sense to not take it personally and say, this person, yes, she's my aunt, but she's very troubled and she's always been kind of broken in a certain way and doesn't want to clean up her stuff. And you just have to laugh. And you had quite a few losses. I'm not saying you can laugh at them, but when you realize it's not directed at you, and I mean, you certainly have with your mom, where you realize it's like, she doesn't have it. She'd probably give it to you if she had it to give, but she didn't have it or have the sense to be there for you the way that you needed, and to look after the impact that your dad's illness, not just his death, but his illness, because you obviously as a child went through that thing where, yes, he died when you were 8, but as you mentioned, when somebody's diagnosed with something, the technical term could be anticipatory grief, but the fact is your family starts to change instantly. So
Mhm.
you had a loss of all that, um, then. So I did want to say one other thing, Victoria, just to make a little bit of a distinction. There everybody is victimized at some point in their life. Like, it's the reason it's an archetype. Victim is an archetype, but I think what you're talking about is when you identify with that archetype and you let it become like, it's important to just not let it become your operating mode as you walk through everything, that you let those worst moments of your life become the definition of everything about you.
What do you think happens in those when you allow that to be how you identify yourself? Is all it does is chips away at hope. Little by little, it's just chipping away at any hope that you have that you could live the dreams that you had as a little child. But we allow these things that happen in our life experience to just chip away at that child within us, and the hopes and the dreams and the imagination and the creativity and all of these things we are born into that are our birthright, that are could be a full expression of who we are. It's like we put the grief veil over our face, and that's we just wear that. We don't see ourselves clearly, we don't see other people clearly, and understanding ourselves. And I think we all innately know what we need to do, but it's the uncertainty, it's the fear of change, it's what it's going to
Well, Victoria, I
mean.
think some people don't know what they need to do at all. I mean, I am similar to you in that I'm a person who, I wish I was wired differently, but I approach life and people more from my head. I'm thinking and then feeling is secondary. And at least I've become self-aware enough to try to switch that, to bring more of like heart energy, emotional connection into things. But I would say I'm probably more IQ than EQ in terms of like which thing comes first. But I do think there are some people who are um there's so many different kinds of personalities out in the world. I mean, I've gotten my family some people with narcissistic personality. They don't think about, I mean, they're just,
Oh,
that's
that's
how they're
true.
wired. There's
Yeah,
parts of their brains that are missing where they don't think about anybody but themselves in a very certain way, and they don't want to be self-aware.
for sure.
There are people who are lacking that. So you and I and other people who have had losses are trying to coexist in a world with some of those people who are very useless when you've had your moment of victimhood. And you know, I mean, you're trying to help them navigate around it, and so am I in my way. So
I totally agree with you. And here's the thing, like I think the answer though, like when I say that, like I think we innately know it's the opposite of what. So how am I feeling right now? How do I want to feel? Well, what do I need to do to get to how I want to feel? We just need to ask ourselves those questions. And we know like the answer is there is what I'm saying.
yes.
Like the answer is there. It's just it takes work. The deep emotional connect to the heart work, because I was all very much in my head, but I'm a very much a feeler. I'm deeply feeling. I'm an empath, highly sensitive. I required a lot of sleep as a child. In fact, most of the pictures I have of me as a kid, I'm sleeping. Fell
But there
asleep
is,
before a birthday party, laying on my bed in my clothes with my shoes on. I slept a lot, but it was the grief, it was the trauma, it was just the fact that I was in sensory overload. There was so much chaos around me. There was so much emotional tension and dis-ease.
you know, something, I have gone through similar experiences, and it's true. When you're young, I wound up having, you know, you were talking about dealing with alcohol issues in your 20s. I got hit a little bit later in my 20s, and it was just this complete physical breakdown where it's like my back was bad, I couldn't walk, because there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and
Yep.
that's the issue. Like dealing with all that stuff is it's exhausting. So, and you're feeling it and you're picking up on everything and it wears you out, and then you get to a point where, for me, I was overwhelmed in one way, you were overwhelmed in another. You know, so many people who drink too much or abuse pills, they're trying to treat something else. You know, you're self-medicating, trying to treat something else. Unfortunately for you, you didn't stay in that too long, because for some people that can go on the whole rest of their lives. So
Well, and we either implode or we explode. And so
right.
for me, I was imploding. Like my hair was falling out. I was very close to having bone marrow biopsy. My iron was, I have always had issues with my iron, but it was getting much lower. Like I was dropping weight. It was like fibromyalgia-like symptoms, like I just
That's
all over achiness and
that's what I
pain.
had. That's
Yeah,
my 20s.
it's emotional. Like so many
Mhm.
of these things are emotional.
I just want to share something though. I had, when I was going through fibromyalgia, my issues with my family where there were certainly members where it's like, well, it's emotional. She's got emotional problems. And it's
Mm,
like, that was not helpful. Yes. And the reason I do is because of all this stressful chaos that went on all the years before that I had no control over and couldn't do anything about. Sometimes I don't want to say the cure gets used against you, but identifying it, I think we're better at it now. It's not
mhm.
like it was in the 90s where you could just say that's emotional, it's psychosomatic, it's this. It's like, yes, it's a your system is doing something protective to try to deal with something else. And you have to get to that something else.
And for people who, like, let's say your family or whoever said that to you, it's like, I would just, when people listening to this, just think, well, who is this person? What do I know about this person who's saying this to me? Well, they probably do they have a bottle of wine every night before they go to
Yeah,
bed? Okay. So you're not connecting the dots for yourself. So don't tell
yeah,
me. You know what I
right,
mean? We
right.
don't connect the dots that what we are feeling physically has anything to do with emotional. We go to doctor, to doctor, to doctor. We go down rabbit holes because we don't connect those dots for ourselves. I always say too, people can only sit with you to the depths that they've sat with their own stuff.
Absolutely.
And so that's where I'm saying, like, sometimes the people who are closest to you are not the best people to take advice from or to seek counsel from because they have skin in your game, right? You learning and evolving and growing will have an impact on that relationship.
Mhm.
And that can be very unnerving for people because you're learning and you're growing and you're changing and you're reflecting and you have self-awareness and you're recognizing, well, this person is maybe not healthy for me right now. And so, there's a natural, I think, one of my friends says, the trash seems to just take out itself. It's like the people in our lives who just, it's not to say like you just disregard people and throw away relationships and what have you. Again, like there is a way to navigate challenging relationships and maintain a relationships with people who are challenging. I've done it by doing the work. And that is working on yourself because that's all you have control over and having very clear boundaries and being openly communicative about what those are in a compassionate way. You don't have to be a jerk. Um, there is a way for compassionate communication. And I think that's an art in and of itself that,
And
with texting and all this stuff.
something, Victoria, I would also say too, you have to make sure that you have the energy to do that when
Mhm.
you engage, like with people who are challenging. Like if you're not in a place where you have the extra energy, because it is a little bit more management, it's a little bit more preparation, it's a little bit more strategy or whatever. You have to make sure that you're actually in a place where you can put out that extra energy to do it. And if you're not, if you're in a very bad spot, it's okay to turtle up for a while and be protective until you can do that.
I don't know, like for me, I'm an empath, highly sensitive, like people pleasing. Like I've always had to manage the energy around me. I've always had to make sure that, if my mom was okay emotionally, then I was okay.
You
So,
had what I would say, that parentified child thing when
yes.
you had the loss, it's like you're taking care of your mom more than
Yes.
she's taking care of you because you're trying to make sure nothing else in your family blows up. That's a great way to develop like the skills of an empath is to have that kind of childhood. Absolutely. I can
Yeah,
see
it's
that.
definitely being a people pleaser. Um Everyone loves it. Everyone else loves it, right?
Mhm.
But you're the one that suffers and you're the one that pays the price. And um, there is a way to still give to others, but yet you have to understand like what your capacity is.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a musician, and in between albums, he talks about how he has to let the well fill up again. Like he doesn't
Mm.
have anything to give. But I do think, in terms of what we're speaking about, one of the things that is so great about the internet age, so much stuff that's bad about it. But one of the things that is great about it is you can go and try to find your people. who will help you fill up again. The
Mhm.
people that have had the similar experience like you know, you're not counseling people because you haven't walked the road before. You are the guy who says, or the lady who says, I can get you out of the hole because I was in that hole and I got out of that hole. And that's it's a great thing about the internet.
And this is how we change generations to come is we learn these things. We learn about grief and we learn how to shift our perspective and how we address grief and how we look at it and how we process it. And it's not a sweeping under the rug. It's not a I'm fine. It's telling the emotional truth when we feel it. And we don't do that because, how often do we pass somebody on the street? Hey, how you doing? I'm great. I'm fine.
Absolutely. But it's a strange thing that also happens in grief sometimes is um, sometimes when you have that exchange, I mean, there is a gamut of this. I know of people who um, have been asked by a neighbor, "How are you doing?" If there's a woman in particular, I remember after her husband died, and this woman wanted to know how she was doing, but my friend really just didn't want to talk to her
Yeah.
because she didn't like her, so she gave her the fine. And then, of course, this woman wanted to probe more things, thinking she was being helpful, and it was just like, leave me alone. Um, and some people have also had like the other, I mean, I'm with you on the, when people ask you, sometimes they're just wanting to be fine, have a good day. But some people in grief have also had like the nice experience where, the people you think should be there aren't there for you. But then
Mhm.
somebody else, and a guy who, Ken Levy, I had him in my film that I made, The Grief Monomyth. This is a long time ago. And he just had an experience where his mail carrier, this is in the city, I think he was living in Brooklyn at the time, said, hey, Ken, how you doing? He's like, fine. And she goes, no, you're not. And just the fact that this person who he saw every day in a very casual way really did see him and really did want to know more was
Mhm.
so valuable. I mean, I hope everybody has that experience because not everybody does have that thing the where they've had that weird thing of some of the people you thought would be really great friends and really great support. Nope. But then somebody else steps up. I hope everybody can have that, but it does.
I've
But
had that.
I'm with you on the fact that most people, yes, it's just they want to do the usual fine. And you're just carrying so much and it's painful. It's painful to, to be carrying that and have to try to do the banal, civil, exchange of pleasantries.
But here's the thing, you can tell the emotional truth. Well, I'm really not great today, but I don't have the capacity to really talk about it right now. You can
Hmm.
tell the emotional truth and still
Mhm.
communicate a boundary.
And say, "Thank you for asking."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't
Mhm.
again, it's
Very
but
good advice.
to lie about it, like I'm fine, like even just saying I'm fine, but energetically the words do not match.
Mm,
You're
mhm,
lying to yourself too, right? Like, if we think about affirmations and mantras, how
mhm.
impactful they can be, right? Like, subconsciously, if you're lying every time someone's asking you, do you start to believe it? I mean, energetically, your body knows the difference, but in your mind, you're like, I just need to get over this. You start telling yourself, I just need to get over this. I just need to let it go. I need to forget about the past. What happened, happened, blah, 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 blah. Right. But if you can be emotionally honest, I'm really not great. But, the sun is still shining behind the clouds. I know that. Eventually it will for me
Yeah,
too. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, yeah. It's that, thing in loss where you just you have it's so hard, though, to try to have faith that if you just keep taking things one step at a time, which sometimes is 1 hour at a time when it's really bad, but if you keep going you will get to those better moments where it's like, "Oh, yeah, the sun is shining and I'm enjoying it, and I didn't think about my loss for the last hour. Yay."
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
But it
So
takes support for
it
sure.
does, it does, and find your people. The most important thing I think, like I said, with the internet, you can find your people.
Well, and one
You
of
might have to
the
go look for your people, though. The people are not just they're not gonna show up on your doorstep with a casserole anymore and be just the right people. You have to probably go find your people.
then you got to ask yourself, what What would I be doing with my life if this person was still here? What would they want? What would they desire for me? What do I desire to, I'm here. I'm still here. What can I do to maybe help somebody else feel less alone in their
Mhm.
grief?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be big stuff. We always think we have to do these big things and, um, write a book or um, start a foundation or organization or things like that. But it's,
I
just
think I
small.
think it's different for everybody. I was speaking with somebody about this last week where you get to the sort of, I don't want to say it's not the end stage of grief because it never ends neatly, but when you start to try to figure out how you're going to make meaning of your life and your loss. For some people, it is writing a book or starting a foundation. For other people, it's just we had that special stone done, we planted a tree,
Mhm.
or we have now a new tradition that we do. But that making meaning thing is important, however you do it. But as absolutely not everybody has to start a foundation. It's the way that's the other part of learning about yourself. It's like, well, what is the way I will do this?
Mhm.
You know, that I want to engage with and live with for a long, long time to come. So
And just live, like live. What does it mean to live? What do you want to experience?
yeah, there's a part I feel too where it's like you realize, okay, my loved one is gone. I'm still incarnate in this body. What am I supposed to do here with this stuff? And for me, and I've discussed this in some other shows, it's like I realized at some point that I was thinking about my sister so much, like talking to her in my head all the time, that if she were alive and I was like constantly like texting her or calling her on the phone, she'd be like, get away from me. I have stuff to do. And it's like she has stuff to do. I have other stuff to do. It was like, you still have the relationship, but yeah, like what else? What else? And that's a great moment when you get to that what else. I had somebody else put it to me like as well, a what now? When you get to that what now moment, it's a good moment, but it does take time to get there. Anybody who's not in it shouldn't feel ashamed or bad about not being in it yet, but just look for it. Keep an eye out. It's
Took me
important.
30 plus years. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to, but it took me that long. But you bring up a good point too, in what you said, um, with talking to your sister. And I think too, like, I think one of the things that could have helped me as a child is to recognize that, just because the physical communication ends doesn't mean that the spiritual communication has
Yeah.
to end, that relationship still continues. You still
Yes.
feel things. You still have things that you would want to say or,
Hmm.
something, my wedding day, right? Like my siblings had a locket made, with my father's picture, and I wore that on my wedding day. And if someone would have said to me, you can still talk to him and have that relationship and that connection, that probably would have helped me too. But
And some people have after death communications that really help them out, that
Mhm.
dream, that sense they're in the house, the smell. And yeah, but even if you don't, you can rebuild that relationship. It's just along different lines and you have to figure it out.
And you
So
can later. Like
yes,
for me, if I didn't as a
yes,
child, you
you
can
are a
later.
great, yes, you are a great example of it's never over.
Never
It's
too
never,
late.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Victoria, I'm going to ask you now the lightning round of questions that I ask all my guests. What does a well-lived life look like to you?
Mm. Feeling the love and support from the people around you. I think that is a reflection of what you are putting out in the world. And if you can feel that in return, I think you're doing all right.
When you die, what do you like hope to learn or experience?
Well, I've come to the awareness as of the last year, just speaking with different mediums on my own podcast and just other grievers
Mhm.
who shared their experiences with people who've passed in their lives. And if it's like school, like people are sharing with me, then I'm all for it. Like more school, but like that's how people describe it is like it's whatever lessons I did not learn in the physical plane, I will receive on the other side. And um it really is aligned with what I know to be true about myself is that I have a thirst for knowledge and and growth. And so if that can continue, I'm like, yeah, bring it.
How do you think people should take care to be connected to their consciousness or spirit or soul?
I think it's a muscle that you have to flex. I think it's something that we have to make time for. It's not something that's just going to drop in your lap. It's I deepen my spiritual um not even necessarily beliefs, but just like this connection or this um understanding that I am supported. And I do have a team. And actually this has only come around in the last 6 months, 3 months, maybe even, of feeling like, and especially as an energy worker, like I never doubted the connection I would feel with guests with my clients. Um, things that would come and like drop into my mail slot. Like I would never question it for them. But
Mhm,
when I was experiencing something, I'd always question it for myself. I would always, my monkey mind would always get in the way.
mhm.
And to learn to just trust for myself, my own inner knowing for myself, that's really something that's becoming new. You never arrive, you never fully arrive. I think it's just a little by little, bit by bit of discovering and um, being open to receiving and learning and growing. And
People who are developing their spiritual abilities, it's sort of this twofold thing of like figuring out their symbolic language, but then that confidence in what they're picking up. You
mhm,
know, the having the trust that yeah, like yeah, and I don't know if it's just if it's part of repetition, like having done it many times and had it somehow validated, but those are like the two things, and it's tricky because it's a very quiet. It's not the same as like you fill out your test and it's scored and it comes back to you. You know, it's a little bit more delicate and refined. So, profane question, as I say, where can people find you and the work that you are doing?
my website is probably the best place, theunleashedheart.com. I have links to my podcast, Grieving Voices, on there. I have free resources. I have a free energy quiz, free ebooks about grief, different types of grief. Um,
Yes,
uh,
you've got guides. You've got a lot of free guides for people. So it's
yeah,
not like big fat books. These are
yeah,
they're punchy. Yeah.
yeah. So everything's on there. I'm on social too. Instagram is usually my favorite place to be, but also on LinkedIn and Facebook, YouTube. I have a YouTube channel because my podcast, it goes on YouTube as well.
Final question is, do you have any final like words or thoughts for the audience today?
If you're like me, the worst has already happened,
Mhm.
and you can choose to be empowered, or you can choose to allow those circumstances to dictate how your life goes moving forward. And I want people to know that there is hope, that you can live to your full potential, that there is good waiting for you. And you got to meet your, whatever you believe, God, universe, spiritual guides, your team, whatever. You got to meet them halfway, and that you do have that support, and to cultivate self-trust, and you will be okay.
Thank you. So important. Thank you so much for joining me today, Victoria.
Thank you for having me. I feel like I went to a lot of different places.
Thanks for watching. Click to join us on another journey, and don't forget to subscribe.